I don't know if you've heard, but it's been raining renewable energy announcements over the past 2 weeks. One oil company after the other has announced humongously large plans to invest in renewables globally. Then the trading companies, the oil trading companies that is, got on the bandwagon and also announced billions of dollars for renewables over the next few years. And what I like about that is that they are doing it because they have to, not because they want to. And one of the most important factors why they have to is their own people. I don't know how many stories I've heard about people who work for Exxon or Chevron or Shell who just simply don't like it there anymore, who just simply want their company to do the right thing. And think about the impact that these announcements have on morale inside these companies who employ hundreds of thousands of people around the world. Today, I want to talk about what these announcements mean for renewables and the clean energy revolution worldwide. Welcome to episode 41 of The Angry Clean Energy Guy with me, Asad Razouk. Thank you for being here. Let's start with the announcements by the oil companies. French oil and gas player Total put renewables in the last 2 weeks at the heart of a new company strategy, and they said they want to invest $3 billion a year in renewables over the period between now and 2025, and they want to ramp that up to deploying 10 gigawatts of renewable energy per year from 2025. Now, 10 gigawatts is huge. That's 3 times South Africa's existing solar capacity. That's also 3 times Thailand's solar capacity. 10 gigawatt is also France's total installed solar capacity today. So Total is talking big. Shell, another oil company, is also increasing its focus on renewables and power markets. And in their case, they want to cut 40% of their oil and gas costs, that's tens of billions of dollars, to free up cash to invest in renewable energy. Here's a fun fact about Shell, by the way. If you look them up these days, you'll see it's referred to as Global Energy Company Shell, which I found to be very entertaining, as opposed to what it is, i.e. oil and gas dinosaur Shell. And you've got to really love the talented branding people they have. In the case of BP, the oil major now sees renewables as being the fastest growing energy source over the next 30 years. That's BP, the oil major we're talking about. And they say that's because wind and solar are now able to power newly electrified, difficult sectors such as transport, heating, and buildings. That's difficult according to BP, of course. But remember, that's an oil company speaking. That's an oil company saying renewables are going to be the fastest growing energy source over the next 30 years in all their scenarios. And so BP is telling us that they're embarking on a journey to become a clean energy giant, and that journey is going to start with a 5-year sprint to dramatically boost wind and solar power. So they want to, in their case, approve by 2025, 4 years from now, 20 gigawatts of renewable energy projects, which is up, in their case, 8 times on what they're doing now. And 20 gigawatts, remember, is about twice France's entire solar capacity today. So that's just Total, Shell, and BP. Wait until the Americans wake up and smell the coffee. That's Exxon, Chevron, and many other American companies that at the moment are doing practically nothing in terms of renewables. But let's move now to the oil and commodity traders. These are relatively obscure names that the general public doesn't know, but they are absolutely huge companies. Just the top 10 global oil trading companies have $2 trillion in annual revenues and employ over 500,000 people. $2 trillion, by the way, is about the GDP of Canada, the country of Canada. So we're talking some really big companies here. The largest one, Vitol, has revenues of $230 billion. That's $230 billion, and it's a private company. Vitol is the world's largest physical oil and gas trader. The second largest is Glencore, with revenues over $200 billion. That one is listed, and it's one of the largest traders of metals, minerals, and oil in the world. The third largest is called Trafigura, with revenues of about $200 billion as well, and that one is also private. And the fourth largest, and I promise I'll stop there, is Mercuria, with revenues of about $120 billion, and Mercuria is also private. So most of the time, none of us have any idea what Vitol, Trafigura, or Mercuria are doing, but the one thing we know for sure is that they are trading an enormous amount of oil. And these companies now appear to have seen the clean energy light. So Trafigura launched a new renewable energy business to invest in solar, wind, and storage projects. They want to deploy 2 gigawatts in the next couple of years. And what's unusual, of course, is that these companies are traders, but in this case, they're talking about actually owning the physical assets. So they want to build and own the solar and the wind power plants. Vitol is already doing the same thing, and they want to go big in renewables, and they've been trying in North America, Africa, and elsewhere. And remember, I'm only talking about announcements made in the last 2 weeks. There's a third trader called Mercuria, which is putting $1.5 billion in battery storage projects in the US. That's a lot of money for one company to deploy in battery storage. So 3 of the 4 biggest oil traders in the world, with combined revenues of about $500 billion, just these 3, are also now flexing muscle in the renewable space. And that's not all. On a previous podcast, you heard me say that China pledged to cut emissions to net zero by 2060, and they did that notably unconditionally. China's never done that before in climate negotiations, ever. So it was a complete turnaround on their part, and a very, very impressive one at that. And so what the Chinese are going to now do is they're going to dwarf renewables deployment anywhere else in the world, triple solar from 2019 levels to 105 gigawatts a year. That's 10 times in 1 year the total installed capacity of France. And they're going to double wind to 50 gigawatts a year. And these are incredibly large numbers. And China going net zero by 2060 is perfectly doable. They're going to do it via a huge increase in solar, a huge increase in wind, and a tremendously impressive effort in green hydrogen. That's how they're going to do it. Then put on top the EU's Green New Deal and assume for a moment that Joe Biden is going to get elected. So what does this all mean? What are the implications of this wall of money, literally hundreds of billions of dollars, pouring into renewables, energy efficiency, batteries, electric cars, electric buses? I should say, finally pouring into renewables, energy efficiency, batteries, electric cars, and buses between now and 2025. By my calculations, just the 3 big oil companies I mentioned earlier, that's Total, Shell, and BP, just in their case, we're talking about $50 billion going into renewables in just the next 4 years and $170 billion by 2030. Add on top tens of billions of dollars from the oil traders that I mentioned. And remember, we're not talking about anyone else. We're not talking about what the banks are going to invest, what the institutional investors are going to invest, what corporates like Google and Apple and many, many others have already said they're going to invest. So expect this. Offshore wind is going to go through the roof and exceed any forecast that you've read in the US, in Europe, in China, in Japan, in Taiwan, in Korea. You're going to see an amazing acceleration in offshore wind deployment. And remember, offshore wind plays to an oil and gas company's strength. Because they know how to build offshore oil and gas exploration, they know how to build offshore wind. And if you want a sneak preview of the explosive growth, which is not built in the numbers today, in the forecasts that you see, the UK announced just a few days ago that offshore wind will power every home in the country by 2030. That's just in 9 years. So by implication, that means about $70 billion of investment to increase the country's offshore wind power about 4 times from what it is today to 40 gigawatts by 2030. And if you think that's a lot or that's ambitious, I've got news for you. It's not. Just look back at the offshore wind industry in the UK. In just 10 years, UK offshore wind capacity went up 10 times from 1 gigawatt to about 10 gigawatts today, while costs went down 2/3. And that's the important bit. Now costs are going to continue to decline, and therefore capacity is going to just explode. So expect that kind of trend to accelerate by 2030 because of the wall of money that I described, which is looking for a home in renewables. Then, in addition to offshore wind, solar and onshore wind are also going to explode in terms of growth. If you think that they're growing fast, you haven't seen anything yet. The massive infusion of liquidity is going to accelerate deployment in China, in India, in North America, in Europe. And for those of you in Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, or in Central Asia, the Middle East, you need to tell your government to get with the program and to get with the program fast. That wall of money will not find it hard to deploy in China, India, North America, and Europe and miss your countries completely. So you will miss a tsunami of investments in renewables if you do not get with the program. And my message to countries still thinking about building coal and gas infrastructure, there is going to be no money for that. And I mean zero. Now, we have to take these oil companies' pledges with a grain of salt because their losses are going to increase over this decade. They're going to increase because they're going to have to write off more and more of their investments in oil, in gas, in petrochemicals. Because remember, it's the same guys drowning us in plastic, and that's got to stop, and that will stop. And these losses are not very hard to imagine. Remember, we're talking about a group of companies which by stock market capitalization were some of the largest companies in the world. But that is no longer the case. The stock price of Total peaked in 2007. That's 13 years ago. The stock price of Shell peaked in 2008. That's 12 years ago. The stock price of BP peaked in 2010. These three companies never saw these level of stock market capitalization since, and therefore investors in them have been losing money since. Exxon peaked in 2014 because the US markets were late to the party. So this might be too little, too late for big oil. But the one thing I can say is that they appear, at least the European ones, to certainly have seen the writing on the wall. And to close on the implications of that wall of money trying to find a home in renewables between now and 2030, one of the ones that I cannot emphasize enough is that we're going to be in a virtuous circle where that money means more deployment, which means more manufacturing capacity, which means costs will continue to decline. And that's cost for solar, costs for wind, for batteries, for electric cars, for electric buses, for your electric heater at home, and on and on and on. One of the most interesting data points to emerge in the last few days was the fact that the world's largest solar and wind power generator, a US utility called NextEra, passed ExxonMobil, a byword for big oil, that was once the world's biggest public company in stock market value. So NextEra, the world's largest solar and wind power generator, passed Exxon in terms of market value. Perhaps it had to take a pandemic to show the markets what a company's true worth was. But here we are. So let me go out on a limb and say this. First, oil majors will most likely have no future in a world in compliance with the decarbonization targets that were agreed by leaders in the Paris Climate Accord and which we need to deliver on. They have no future. Second, watch as the US, China, India, and Europe pivot to generate 80% of their electricity from clean energy by 2035. So super fast and much faster than what most people think. And watch them do that dependably. Watch them do that while costs to consumers go down. So while our electricity bills go down, not up as they've done for decades under the stewardship of the oil and gas industry. And watch them do that without the need for any new coal, gas, or oil plants. And if the rest of the world doesn't want to be left behind, it needs to get with the program, and it needs to do so very fast. Thank you so much for listening to me, the Angry Clean Energy Guy, in this episode 41. If you like this podcast, please rate it wherever you listen to your podcasts, and have a great couple of weeks.